Dude, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I know it was last minute, and these things happen. I had a bunch of people lined up to do this podcast, but COVID-19 had other plans, man. And
Such is life.
exactly. So people's reality is very different now. They're home, they're with the kids. It's difficult to connect. So thanks for coming on, man. I do appreciate it. You're breaking all sorts of record here on the Backstage podcast.
Jamais 203. Third time's a charm.
This is the third time, man.
Yeah.
How are you? How are you handling the situation? How are you coping with everything?
I'm going to say the same thing that I've told everybody who's asking that question, because it's a question that everybody's getting. How are you feeling?
Yeah.
I think it's a natural response to want to ask somebody you care for, those you love around you, your friends. How are you feeling?
Yeah.
How are you coping? It's we cope when we ask that question. It's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
I'm so sick of this shit. I'm so done with self quarantine and self isolation. I know it's what's required. I'm not going to break that. I'm going to follow the rules that have been set into play, because I know it's good. It's for the good of the global population, and for it's what we need to do. And it's a really easy thing to do. Staying at home is not a really difficult thing until you get to that second, third, fourth, fifth. When you start forgetting what day it is, and what week it is.
Yeah.
That's been the scary part for me.
But also the fact that you're such a you're such a public figure. You're out there. You're used to networking, going to places, meeting people, and then suddenly everything is halted. Right? I mean, it's just a strange. And just to go back to what you're saying, that we have this natural reflex to, when we talk to people, to ask them, how are you, how's your family, how are you doing, and then when we're done the conversation, stay safe. These are things that we could have very easily done before. It's just that now we're so sensitized to everything happening that we seem like we care. Not that we didn't care before. It's just that now we're more vocal about it.
As much as I'm sick and tired of this shit, I do look at the upside, and I do say to myself, it was Easter a couple of weeks ago. I think it was last week for you.
Yeah.
But a couple of weeks ago, I think I had a Zoom call with an extended family, Zoom call with, I think we were at one point 20 or 25, maybe somewhere in the middle there.
Yeah.
All in different parts of the world, from France to Calgary to I think we had people coming in from British Columbia, different parts of Europe, all calling in. And that's what I loved. I mean, that was probably like a big boost in terms of me being able to get through that week, and sort of supercharge me into going, staying away from depression mode, because I'm not able to see my friends. I'm not able to go to do a 5 set with my colleagues. That's
we've definitely taken advantage of the fact that like in your case, there's people that you don't get to talk to or see on a regular basis, and now because of what's happening, and I think it's a good thing, right? I mean, you're staying in touch. You're like, okay, let's organize this Zoom thing. The other day, I was at my in-laws, and it was my father-in-law's birthday, and they called him from Colombia, right? So there were like 5 or 6 people, and
that's awesome.
But it's fun, you know what I mean? It's just the things that were always there, but you never did it. You never had that reflex of saying, look, let's do a group FaceTime or a group Zoom. And now you're doing it because, you care. I mean, you cared before, but now it's just that, let me just make sure that everyone I know and everyone I love is okay, right? They're doing fine. They have everything they need.
And I hope that carries on. Like, I think we're going to be in this position, at least to some degree, for the foreseeable future. But I do hope that even after, be it this year, be it in 2021, that we're through and done with this, that we're able to continue that collaboration. The other upside to this whole thing is that I've been drinking a lot more during the middle of the day. Not even the middle of the day, like the early hours of the day.
Screw the time. I mean,
don't tell anybody.
Yeah. No, nobody's gonna find out now. Yeah, nobody's gonna hear about it.
This is not tea or coffee or anything. This is
that's the trick. Now you put it in a mug. You've crossed that next level.
Nobody's the wiser. You think I'm going to pull out my flask? That's going to give it away easily.
Tell me about work. You guys stopped. How's that going?
stopped. We're in the industry of generating conferences, of putting together conferences for a year, one in Montreal, Toronto, Paris, and Miami, and we've had to postpone two. We are probably going to have to postpone the other two. And we're in a position where we are probably the industry that is most affected by this. And where, we're dealing with major stakeholders in, industries across the world where we had hope. We had hope that for our latest conference, which was supposed to be our latest conference, the Miami conference in April, early April, we had hope in the beginning of March and mid-March that we were still going to be able to pull through. More in the beginning of March, and it quickly dissipated in about it was like a 48-hour cycle when things started becoming really serious, and governors and started putting out decrees, not necessarily in Florida, but outside or in and around Florida and across the U.S. And press conferences of the such of COVID-19 became a very real and daily happening. That it was not going to happen, and that we would have to push back to September for our Miami conference. For our Montreal conference, which was supposed to be taking place in June, push back to December. The International Economic Forum understands that we weren't able to pull through on this whole thing, and this is the same situation that everybody else is in. So I mean, it's a fact of life.
You're also in the industry that when things kick back, when everything comes back, I don't want to say normal, but because I don't think we're going to see normal anytime soon. But when this quarantine thing is lifted, you're also in that industry that is going to pick up much slower than everything else. We were talking about this before recording. Right. People's trust, people's paranoia has been affected, right? I mean, even if tomorrow everything is suddenly okay and we're like, okay, let's go back to normal. If you asked me personally, I would think twice about going to a concert or to an event or to a theater show or to anything that has to do with hundreds, if not thousands, of people around me. Constantly questioning, thinking, coughing now has become the worst thing. You hear someone coughing, you're like, oh, what's going on?
Listen, I'm drinking a slurp of coffee and maybe drinking my coffee too much or too heavily. And I was going for a walk the other day, and there was near where I live, there was a bit of a shopping area there. So there were people lined up and whatnot. And I was taking a sip of coffee. I coughed because there was some in the back of my throat, and I got the dirtiest stares that I've ever gotten in my life. Yeah. And I was ostracized for coughing on a bit of coffee.
Yeah, I said this on the last podcast. I read this tweet when this whole situation first started, like end of February, I think, or beginning of March. I was going through Twitter, and I can't remember who it was. I wish I knew so I can credit him, but he was writing, the coughing in public has replaced the N-word.
Pretty much.
You cough in public, it's over. You're done, man. It's like, you're straight to crucifixion.
You're done. But the other thing too, just on the place that conferences, and especially like the IEFA with our conference of Montreal, our Toronto Global Forum. What I think is the upside is that once we are through with this, and once we can actually put on a production, and we're going to be in a position where we can highlight the government of Canada's efforts. I want to say highlight all of the good, but I mean, I think maybe also look at what wasn't so good. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the fair and honest way of being able to evaluate, how the government did. And I think that's one thing that I look forward to, is being able to say, hey, you know what, Canada's open for business. Mm-hmm. We want to restart. We're a huge power in the G7. We're a huge power in the G20, and we're open for business, and Canada's back. And I think that's the way to approach this. But time will tell when we will be able to do that, because obviously right now we can't.
Yeah. Look, I think I agree with you in the sense that we need to look positively into the future. Definitely, we're going to come out stronger from this. Unfortunately, lives will have been lost, right? And that is the most unfortunate thing. This is the saddest thing of it all. But, going forward, I mean, I think as a country and as provinces and as societies, I think we're going to be much better prepared for whatever comes next. If hopefully it doesn't, but let's say it does. And it's sad because it does take a catastrophe like this to make you realize that you are so not well prepared. I remember the ice storm in '98. Nobody saw this coming. Businesses were lost. I mean, it wasn't as bad as this is right now, but it woke up a lot of people, right? And that put in place this whole mechanism on how to deal with natural disasters, right? Same thing after the train explosion in Lac Mégantic here in Quebec.
Yeah.
Nobody even thought, a train like that going through a residential area could cause huge damage. Like hadn't it crossed anyone's mind before? But after that, tragedy happened, they woke up and they implemented all these policies about, all these transport laws and stuff, to better prepare for the future and hopefully to avoid something like this from happening again. So
So
I'm curious to see what's going to happen next, like from a medical perspective also, right?
right, and I think the person who said this the best in terms of like the type of crisis that we're dealing with, like a little liner that I liked from him was John Baird, who's my mentor and a good friend of mine. He said to me, "This is 9/11 in slow motion.
Hmm.
Nobody has ever dealt with this before. But when you go from a government that went from at the beginning of the month to a $20 billion deficit to $150 billion deficit plus because we just had a $9 billion program that was announced today for to help students, from the government of Canada in the wake of COVID-19. I mean, this is really you're going to see you're seeing multifaceted approaches to dealing with the challenge of the economy, the labor force, quarantine. It's all coming together, and it's unprecedented. We haven't seen anything since World War II
Yeah.
of this scale. The only difference is that there was no fighting in this side of the Atlantic.
Yeah, exactly. No, the economical situation is honestly scaring me. I mean, we had this conversation so many times before about how worrying all these deficits are. No security blanket for any situation like this, right? Like the unexpected occurs. What do you do, right? And you're comparing that with Quebec that was going into this with a $5 billion surplus. They have all the leeway in the world to make any decision they want. Of course, it's going to impact the economy, but at least the government, on an economic side perspective, much more prepared, right? And you look
Right.
at it from the federal side, and like you said, I mean, we're over 200 billion in surplus in deficit. It's worrying about the future. Like, okay, the next couple 5 6 7 months, whenever we everything is rebooted again. I mean, me and you and everyone else is going to have to pay for all these things, right? At some.
Exactly, and I think there was a really good column that came out from Jack Mintz. I think it was in the Financial Post, and he was talking about countries with highly leveraged households, corporations, public sectors are going to face immense instability. As credit spreads, we are giving out as much, governments are giving out as much money as they can, loaning as much money as they can right now, but it devalues the currencies. It's people are becoming indebted to such a large extent. We don't know when the economy is. We have an idea when it's going to start up again, but there's always the possibility of there being a second wave of COVID-19, and this is at the forefront of all major governments right now in the world that are looking at this. Canada has not had a history of runaway deficits or debt since the past economic crisis. But at the same time, we shouldn't be bragging about our public finances. And this is one thing with Justin Trudeau. You have to look at the part of our debt is about to mature and is going to probably have to be replaced with new financing. You're looking at the fifth highest amounts of new financing. Among the G7. The only countries that beat us in that category are Japan, United States, Italy, and Spain. So I mean, it's not good. It's not a pretty picture.
Yeah. Because now that you mentioned the second wave, I just remembered, I think a couple of days ago, England came out and announced that nothing is starting until the end of the year.
Yeah.
They disappointed everyone. Everyone thought like it's only a couple more months. And they're like, listen, until the end of 2020, this is what it's going to be like, right? So they're preparing, obviously, for a second wave coming in the fall. And I think that we have a benefit to looking at what other big economies are doing, just to have an idea of what may potentially happen here as well, right? And it's very conflicting because we have just our neighbors in the south that are acting completely in the opposite direction, right? Where they just want to just start everything as quickly as possible, and I don't think that's the right move either. So we're kind of stuck in between these two in these two worlds.
Where we're stuck in between these two worlds, and also, the one difference that's happening right now to the south of us is the fact that there's an election this year.
Yeah,
And I mean, you have to think of this. Trump is no stranger to political meddling. I'm not talking necessarily about foreign interference, but he does that too. But when it comes to political meddling, that intertwines with conflicts of interest and questions of morality and ethics. A great reporting job by the New York Times this morning on how Trump appointed Stephen Moore to his economic council to restart America's economy after COVID-19. Somebody who has been caught orchestrating part of the protests that are happening in Wisconsin, Michigan, Maine, Pennsylvania, all across the United States, Colorado, protesting these confinement and quarantine efforts that have been put in place by governors in some Republican, a good portion of Republican run states, governments, and this gentleman, Mr. Moore, has been playing both sides of the aisle. Has been playing the I'm this advisor to the president, but he's also at the same time playing up this political card
yeah.
of being able to orchestrate the same people that were instrumental in the Tea Party movement, the same people that pushed Trump to victory in 2016 because they felt that they were disenfranchised, and which I'm not saying they weren't, but when political decisions start interfering with public health decisions, I think you have to start really asking yourself, is this the right course for a country?
It's incredible. Like, I understand the urgency of starting up your economy, especially for a country like the U.S. The hugest, one of the biggest industries in the world. I get it, but to what cost, man? You know what I mean? I mean, why neglect science when when you have what, over 40,000 deaths? I mean, it's insane. It's insane. Why put people's lives at risk?
Because I think that there are a lot of people that have come to the conclusion that it's okay to kill off granny and grandma if it means me being able to maintain my job, and if it means me being able to buy a house. I think a lot of it's selfishness. I think and people have put forward have advocated economic efforts to restart the economy with there being conclusive evidence that it will kill more people, and they're willing to accept that. They're okay killing people off in that sense.
At the same time, Michael, man, you have to think of a country of this size, right? Of this magnitude. 300 million people. How many people are jobless right now, and they're just desperate for income? They're like, listen, man, I don't care if I get sick. I don't care if it means I'm putting my life at risk. I need to feed my family. I need my business back on track. I need to pay my bills. There's all these things that we need to do, and I just can't have it done right. You know what I mean? I mean, you're lucky now because we have these programs in place where you still have some income coming in, right? We got lucky in our industry. We were considered essential services, so luckily enough, we kept working. Um, a lot of people aren't in that situation. You understand? And they don't
Now,
have the programs that we have here in place in Canada. Of course, we have a much smaller population that allows us to cover. And of course, I mean, $2,000 a month here in Canada, maybe. I mean, it's some sort of health, but you know, m- for
if you
many,
can get access to it,
yeah.
if you
But
qualify for it, I mean, that's the real question too. And it seems that every single week, Justin Trudeau's having to come out and respond to the fact that oh, our CERP program didn't cover this this segment of the population. It didn't cover this segment of the population. Having to always have to there were many other options that he had in terms of CERB. There was the ability for him to take everybody who filed their tax returns, their 2018 tax returns last year, and send out checks through that method there.
Mhm.
The reason why they didn't do it is because there's going to be a lot of people who, first off, didn't need CERB in the first place that were going to get it then. There's a lot of people that died over that period of time who would have been, say, getting checks and whatnot. But that's the real problem right now. But we're left with a labor market where 7 million plus people are unemployed. That's where we are right now.
Going forward, how do you think, what kind of effects is this going to have?
I think people have the restaurant industry is cut in half effectively.
Mm-hmm.
People stopped going to restaurants long before governments asked people to stop. You look at tourism, hospitality, airlines. It's going to take a lot longer to get back. There's going to have to be a bailout for the airline industry, without a doubt. And this is not the first time that this has occurred. The problem posed by a 90% reduction of flights is a huge problem for the airlines. But the backstop from the federal government to Air Canada that happened in the 1990s, that loan that was given to them, that backstop was paid back in full with interest.
Yeah.
So the government will have to step in, but it's not to say that it's going to be an economic disaster for taxpayers, from that perspective, at least. We're going to have to. Government is going to have to increase its role in terms of being able to ensure that industries don't die.
Yeah.
Case in point, what's happening in Alberta right now, which the announcement that came from Justin Trudeau earlier this week. Obviously not enough, but at least it's something at this point. I think that our lives are definitely changed at this point. We're not going to be going back anytime soon. But when you think of all the people that are frontline, when was the last time that you went to a supermarket? And this is just like a personal thing for me. Like, I've never thanked the cashiers at supermarkets,
Yeah.
these frontline customer service employees are demigods. They're godsends for us because they're keeping us alive.
Yeah.
They're keeping the economy going.
Yeah.
And if it was not for them, we'd be gone.
Yeah. No, 100%. 100%. How do you feel about this whole sense of, I don't want to say anti-globalization, but there's this whole sensitivity towards, local markets. Quebec created the le panier bleu. There's all this, approach about helping the Canadian and Quebec businesses because, there's this movement of solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that will be able to sustain itself going forward, or are we just going to go back to what it was? People are going to think of their pockets, their profits, and eventually we're just going to go straight back into the globalized society that we were and produce things abroad?
I'm already looking at places to go on vacation when we're allowed to, in Canada. That's a rule that I've made for myself, and I've been looking at the Maritimes. I've been looking at going out to BC. So for me, I don't. Obviously, nationalism has something that we've seen definitely more pronounced at this point. I mean, no matter where you are in the world, and I think that's going to be a trend that we're going to keep on seeing. But at the same time, I think that we're going to be put into a position where we are not going to have a choice but to spend our money here in Canada, and we're going to have it is going to become the norm to want to vacation in the rest of Canada just for the sake of helping the economy and not sending dollars outside of Canada.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's going to be the new normal, and I'm fine with that, at least for the time being.
Yeah, I was talking more like in terms of businesses. Like let's say you're a big manufacturer. They're asking you. The government now is suggesting to kind of retrofit manufacture so that we can produce things over here. At the end of the day, the owners that have these businesses, do you honestly think that they're going to continue doing that just because it's supporting local, or at the end of the day, he's just going to think back to his profits and just have everything shipped from China or Asia or wherever,
Right. From that sense, I think that you're going to have to see a balance between it. But I think at the end of the day, people are going to want to count, how much money they have in their pockets, and whatever is going to be the most effective and cheapest, option for them in that sense. So I think globalism, from that perspective, maybe it's going to be a quasi-globalistic type of comeback. But at the same time, I think there's always a compromise that could be found. One thing that we've definitely seen from this situation is how delicate our supply chains are. I was speaking to my dad earlier today, and just having a conversation. He's a butcher by trade. He is now an advisor for a major meat supplier in the Montreal region, and he advises them on what to do. And I was just talking with him, having a
Still there?
what's happening in the U.S. right now with many of these types of COVID-19 cases happening in the manufacturing sector and also in the meat industry. We were having a conversation about the fact that so many of the cattle, for example, are not being processed, and they're growing outside of the size that they are required to actually go to market. So they cannot slaughter the cattle right now. They cannot slaughter the pigs that go to, let's say, the Asian market and the Chinese market. We export an immense amount of pork to China, and at this point, the demand is just not there. We're in a really tough position right now. We're going to have to really relook at how supply chains work. And one thing that has really become front of mind, I think, for a lot of premiers is, and for the federal government too, is just in terms of retrofitting manufacturers that, look at the 3M situation that we had just a few weeks ago, where we weren't able to procure we were able to procure a very limited supply of N95 masks. 3M has no manufacturing capacity here within Canada. It's based largely in the US. And because of that, the federal government and FEMA were able to restrict any of 3M's exports to the Canadian market or the rest of the global market. And I think that really put us in a compromising position. The premiers came to the fight, and so did the federal government in terms of being able to procure masks in the end. But at the same time, it was a tough fight for us to do that, especially when you have at the same time, just with N95 masks, you have a fight between different states. And this is something that I find wildly remarkable, where you've seen in Canada premiers working with each other, the Council of the Premiers, the federal government working in tandem with each other to procure masks and to ensure that ventilators are shared. Jason Kenney sent off a massive supply of N95 masks to Ontario and Quebec, and I believe also some to British Columbia, and has also, I think, he sent off some ventilators earlier this week as well. Sort of saying, Alberta's here to help our brothers and sisters across Canada. This is the message we want to send. When we've seen that as the Canadian sort of response, what we've seen in the US are states bidding against each other for N95 masks and for ventilators. And not only that, the states are then having to compete against FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and then FEMA is then having to battle against the federal executive, the federal government itself, the executive branch, having to battle against them. So even within the same government, you have agencies and branches fighting against each other for ventilators, for N95 masks, and then you have states that are saying, well, what the hell are we supposed to do? We can't get a thing for our people.
It's funny how certain states, like I was listening to I can't remember who it was on the radio. They were comparing California to Canada, one of the best prepared states over there, right? I mean, they took charge, they took the lead, and they were well prepared before anyone else. Even though the president was, until mid-March, was saying that it's no big deal, it's nothing, it's it's going to pass. These guys had already supplied themselves with all sorts of medical equipment, masks, ventilators, and ahead of the game. Same thing for Alberta here in Canada. They took up. They were very proactive, which
that was
is
back in January.
Yeah. So they're in a position now, like you said, to supply the rest of Canada. It's incredible, and this is, we're talking about this before we started recording. In terms of leadership, we've seen certain things that we never thought we'd see, and we've seen things that have amazed us. I mean, in Canada, though, generally, I gotta say, the premiers, even the prime minister, so far, I mean, they're, the they're doing quite well, with the task at hand. You got to give it to them. It was, Justin Trudeau came in a little bit late there, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt. I mean, it's Canada, and it's not one
His approval points are up 21 points. That's for his approval rating.
Yeah, Michael. In any situation, if you look throughout history, any crisis situation, your leader always goes up. Leader always goes up.
And the one who has, of course, benefited the most off of this has been François Legault.
Yeah,
I think he has the highest approval rating at something at 89% in terms of being able to handle with this situation here. Which, I mean, he already was, he already had the honeymoon. The honeymoon was extended, and now we're hit with this, post election. So
he's doing a fantastic job. Even though I think this week I'm noticing that it's becoming a little bit more political. He started attacking the unions. They got into a little bit of a scuffle with the doctors. He's still looking out for help. People are now starting to question, like, where the hell are these people? What the hell are you doing? Why can't you just get these people to come? We need the help. Why is the army delayed? Why can't Justin Trudeau move? People are now, I noticed in the very beginning, especially the journalists were very reluctant to ask the tough questions because they knew how sensitive the situation was, and also because it was very well managed from the very beginning. Now I feel that the journalists are kind of pressing a little bit. And
so sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm just going to say that the when you look at post COVID, or at least post quarantine COVID, as we get out of this and go back into real life and real business, or some semblance of what life was before COVID-19, and you have to look at, like, who are going to be the heroes in all of this. It's not going to be the premiers. It's not going to be the prime minister. Those they come and go. But I think the real leaders are, and people that are going to have the highest approval amongst the population are going to be the nurses, and are going to be the doctors, and are going to be the frontline employees.
People are going to realize how important these industries are that have been so undermined so underestimated. I'm not talking about necessarily the health industry, because that I think everyone always respected them and had them at very high esteem. But look at the farming industry, the food distributors, the truck drivers, the delivery drivers, like you said before, the cashiers at the supermarkets, cleaning and maintenance personnel, all these industries that people weren't even mindful that they even existed, right?
Sure.
They weren't even in anyone's radar. They're realizing now, how important their contribution has been. And I think, and I agree with you, going forward, I look at our industry, for example, right? We took a little bit of a hit, but thankfully everything was fine. Going forward, I'm hopeful that, when we're looking at business owners, building owners, or property managers, they're going to be much more careful in the way they select, for example, their cleaning company. You know, they're not going to question you necessarily on why does it cost this much. I think at this point, going forward, they're going to be much more mindful of the service that you're offering. I think it's going to filter out the garbage that is out there, the lack of quality. And I think in general, it's going to give a little boost to the companies that are in this industry. And I think that goes for all the other ones as well.
But at the same time, like, looking at how nurses and doctors have performed and how they are on the front lines and how we are so indebted to them for being at the forefront of this crisis. Going forward, how am I, as a premier, going to publicly attack them during a future labor negotiation?
Yeah.
How am I, as the minister responsible for the Treasury Board, going to have to tell them, no, we're actually not going to give you this 2% salary increase that you're requesting on behalf of your workers?
Mm-hmm.
How does that become palpable to the public, and how will the public react to? And this is why I think chief executives, premiers, and their cabinet are really going to have to rethink their sensitivity to these issues, and how are they going to be able to respond to these issues when it comes to future labor negotiations from a lot of the groups right now that are saving our ass.
Yeah. 100%. How do you see the leadership in this thing? I mean, obviously, Legault, he has stood out. I think he was he. I remember in the beginning, he was pressing the federal government to take action on certain things
Yeah.
that came days later. You know what I mean? And I think that's when people noticed the leadership ability in François Legault.
Right. There's a few examples I can take from this. Just, I mean, looking back to a few weeks ago, maybe even more than that. Again, I'm super losing track, and I know
Yeah,
everybody's losing track of time at this point. But you probably recall when we were starting to shut down a lot of the air travel, or even before that, rather, when Valérie Plante had to send members of the Public Health
yeah,
Administration of Montreal to the airport
to the airport
because
because
there
the
was
flights
nobody
weren't
from
canceled yet. Yeah, yeah,
they weren't canceled. There was nobody checking from, be it from CBSA or from Canada Public Health, from Health Canada. There was nobody there to check for symptoms. There was or very little screening that was occurring, and there need to be some. And I think that was. I don't think that was um, a move done out of political opportunism. I think that Valerie and her administration there did it because it was the right thing to do.
no, but they had to
Um,
do it. I mean, something had to be done.
exactly, and that's a leadership role that I look at somebody like that and I say to myself, this is somebody who understood the gravity of the situation, and they weren't taking advantage of it for politics. They were doing it for the public good.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And you know, back in that time, uh, I was wondering, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one wondering, what the hell is taking so long?
Yeah,
And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're always so dependent on the decisions made in the US, and they were extremely late in everything, right? So having that in mind, how can Justin Trudeau come out and say, yeah, we're closing the border before it has even been considered by the American administration? You
yeah.
understand?
And but the worst part, they spent 2.5 years negotiating NAFTA,
Yeah,
keeping the border open. They spent 2.5 years. Then the Trudeau government negotiated the closure of it in less than 24 hours.
yeah.
So I think one thing I would add. I think that it's a question of cross partisan collaboration, and I think the premiers have been working very closely with Ottawa on this. They understand that they're dealing with an administration that is super confrontational. So it's comforting to see this. But just on the NAFTA front, could you imagine 2.5 years to keep the border open, to keep trade going? Everything's happy go lucky. 24 hours it took to close the border. So
Yeah. Look, when push comes to shove, I mean, and when you're confronted with this type of situation, I mean, I think it's the only decision left to make. The question is, how long can you keep this for? I mean, this is our biggest economic partner, right?
but you can't keep this for much longer than what it is already now. I mean, at the same time though, look at Montreal. Look where we are right now. We are the epicenter for Canadian cases of COVID-19. We need to be able to realize that and to face the facts of that, and to realize that of all of the Canadian jurisdictions, we are going to probably be the jurisdiction that will have the most rigorous types of social distancing measures kept in place going forward, while we are analyzing the slow reopening of the economy and of business and of schools, and as we step by step, we are going to still be behind where every other province is in Canada, just by the simple fact that we are the epicenter for what is going on right now, and that's going to cause a lot of jealousy, I think,
Of
and that's
course,
going
I
to
was
cause
going to say that it's going to have a very negative impact when you're seeing everything rolling in Toronto,
yeah.
for example, or in any other big city. How much are people going to respect those directives?
But leadership goes both ways. You have the bump in the polls right now that you're seeing for François Legault and how he's at 89% approval right now amongst Quebecers. Watch when things start reopening across Canada and Quebec is still left behind, not by the fact that we're doing something drastic to piss off the population and to annoy them and to bug them for the sake of doing it. It's watch. I'm interested to see how the public here in Quebec will react to Legault doing that, because I'll give you an example of somebody who's doing it for the sake of not. I don't somebody who I really think is doing it just to do something. which is not really effective, is not somebody who is really bestowing a lot of leadership, is John Tory, Mayor John Tory. A lot of my friends in Toronto are saying that, John Tory is the type of person who wakes up in the morning and is just looking for something to ban, and is looking for an essential service to restrict, and is looking for a new method to create social distancing in a way that he can find more people. And not because Torontonians aren't following the rules already put in place, or the general standards that have been put in place across Canada, on the social distancing norms that are widely accepted by across Canada. But just for the sake of doing something and saying, hey, you know what? Hey, my name's John Tory. Don't forget about me. I'm the mayor of Toronto. I'm still here. Look, I'm being proactive. But he's doing the wrong things,
Yeah.
and that is where you're seeing a lot of people in Toronto pissed off over what he's doing, because the social distancing measures he's putting out there are not effective. The ticketing in parks of when you're alone walking your dog versus the lack of enforcement for a bunch of people walking down the street that I've heard of, and you're 5, 10, 15 people in a crowd walking down the street late at night, and there's no repercussions for that, that's a big problem right there.
Yeah. How do you feel about this whole boost in authority that we've given to our police officers? I mean, at some point, we understand that someone has to take over that control, but this whole, you know, police authority is bugging me. The fact that they have been giving all these extraordinary rights to just do whatever the hell they want bothers me a little bit.
It's dangerous. It's dangerous. What scares me the most is how easily I've seen politicians of all sides been so accepting of the evaporation of of civil liberties for Canadians in this time. And while I do think that some of the measures for law enforcement are appropriate and definitely will keep people safe and healthy, and will ensure that people will follow social distancing measures and whatnot, I do think that being so relaxed about the relinquishment of things that we consider so important for us and ingrained in Canadian society, as privacy rights, civil, basic civil liberties,
Yeah.
to be really disturbing, and to be very disturbing that politicians are not willing to, at the minimum, remark on how these are extraordinary times.
Yeah.
Yes, extraordinary measures are required, but to at least note that this is something that would not be is not necessarily something that they should be accepting so easily, which I find they are accepting very easily.
Yeah, that bothers me a lot too, and I'm also questioning, um, going forward in the future, are we gonna remove these extra measures easily? Are we gonna say, okay, look, we're done, it's over, everything's back to normal, or are these guys gonna be on a power trip to the point where it's like, no, this is what it is now. If I see
They're-
something
they're-
I don't like, you know
right.
what I mean? I've been giving these rights.
Well, I mean, I made the comparison to 9/11 before, in terms of this being 9/11 in slow motion. Um, we saw a huge increase in the police state, and in terms of cybersecurity measures that were taken to monitor Canadians and monitor how governments in Western society we're able to monitor to a greater extent through the passing of legislation, and the increase in budgeting towards the security states. That was what happened in 9/11. I would not be surprised if we saw the same thing happen post COVID-19. It's something that has become the norm now. The other thing that scares me is that so many, putting the politicians aside, because I love criticizing them, but just people in general are not willing to fight for this kind of things. They're not willing to fight in a crisis situation like this. This will be the type of, this is the type of subject that will take the back seat, and will probably remain in the back seat until probably another year, 18 months, until we're done with this. And that's a very scary factor. People are just so willing to say, you know what, these are rights that I never really used before. They're not important for me. I don't care about my privacy. You're seeing, in China, they're putting bracelets on people to be able to track them and monitor them. You're seeing in other Western countries now have applications on their phone being installed on the phone to be able to show that they are they've been tested for COVID-19, and that they're not a risk, and that they're able to get inside of a grocery store or into a restaurant. These are things that once we reopen our economy, this is a very likely possibility. We could be in the position where we're going to have to, take over this type of, police state mentality, where we are going to be, this will depend whether or not I can walk into a grocery store or a restaurant or a Starbucks.
Yeah. That is honestly something that is troubling me, because the more the time passes, the more people accept it as normalcy, right? And I'm
Right.
afraid that at the end, nothing's going to be done to counter it. That's what scares me.
You're probably right, and I think a lot of people are going to be very accepting of it. But I mean, who's going to fight back? Canadian civil liberties lawyers. I'm sure a few people will take up the cause, but at the same time, government rarely fights back when they get more power. That's usually not how interest groups work.
Yeah.
They're very happy to take on this type of new power and new administration.
Yeah, exactly. Tell me about the conservative race. Obviously, everything was put on hold. I wanted to send you a message because there was something that bothered me so much. Last time you were here, we were talking about the race. We were looking at different options, different possibilities of
Right.
leaders coming up, and we mentioned Rudy. Remember Rudy, our friend
Yes.
Rudy. And neither myself or yourself thought that he was going to get anywhere far in the race. But the guy kept going. He was doing what he had to do. He was in the race, and this is what bothered me, man. And I want to see what you have to what you have to say about it. I followed the guy. Obviously, I followed most of the candidates. He was the first one to come out and ask the Conservative Party to just stop the race. It made no sense, and he was right. The guy was absolutely 100% right. He felt uncomfortable asking for money from his supporters at a time where either they were losing their jobs, either they were looking for, ways to get income going forward. Their kids were out of school, like all these situations that people are going through, and it made absolutely no sense for you to contact them in order to get funds. I think he was absolutely right. The party ignored the guy. Obviously, he didn't make the criteria for the next phase. And as soon as that next phase passed, they paused the race. So obviously the guy got eliminated. He put a post up on his Facebook page explaining what happened. I found that so disgusting, man. It's such a low blow. Like the day right after,
Right.
that next phase, he didn't qualify. Whoever qualified passed, and let's pause the race. It seemed as though it was done purposefully to eliminate whoever they didn't,
Right.
quote
So
unquote, didn't want.
yeah.
And you have the big players, obviously, that stayed on board. I just found that so unfortunate, even though, and I'm saying it publicly, I don't necessarily think that he would have gone, further. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But the guy was in the race. He was doing it, and he was doing it very passionately, and good for him. I just found that to just to suck. You know what I mean?
His instincts were right in terms of, and I think he really was able to up his political capital, and was able to people. Let me just say one thing about Rudy Husney. Rudy is loved by everybody in the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
You meet this guy, you're just in love with him because he is so down to earth and so kind and so gentle and brilliant.
Yeah.
He was a director of stakeholder relations for Andrew Scheer during his time in opposition. He worked for Minister at FAST, I believe at International Trade. He's somebody who is super, super respected by all portions, all groups within the big blue tent of the Conservative Party. So, that's the way he is. I remember Rudy went to the I think the Progressive Conservative Party of Nova Scotia. Hosted a all federal conservative leadership candidate get together in Halifax, and Rudy went there, and I think Rudy got more applause and more cheers than Peter MacKay. That's Peter's home province, and it's just because people were in love with Rudy, and his personality, it's infectious.
Look, the guy took it like a champ. I'm not saying anything. He took it like a champ, but it sucks, man. It just sucks. Why would you cut this guy out? You know what I mean? It's not fair. Not because we know him and we want him to go forward, but just because what he was saying made absolutely 100% sense. You know what
It
I mean?
did, and he was ahead of everybody else in terms of being able to say that, and that takes courage, and that is leadership right there. And I think he would have brought, it's really unfortunate because we have no Quebecer, and no francophone within the leadership race now, which I think is truly unfortunate. And I do think he's a serious contender, and I told him that from the beginning. I wasn't supporting. I was supporting him, as a friend, but I wasn't supporting him per se against any other candidate because I'm not supporting anybody at this point.
Yeah.
And I don't think I will be supporting anybody going into the Conservative leadership race because I think people are just so sick and tired of such a terrible campaign. It is probably the worst political campaign, apart from maybe Jeremy Corbyn winning the Labour leadership back a few years ago. It's boring. It's worse than the Ontario Liberal
Yeah,
campaign they had a few months ago with Del Duca winning.
yeah, that was horrible. But at the same time, I mean, look, they have to confront this whole situation, right? So it puts a dent in, the enthusiasm, quote unquote enthusiasm, whatever enthusiasm there was. It does suck. I mean, look at the Liberal race here in Quebec. Same thing. I mean, not that it was exciting before, but now it's like, well, people
Can
have
I just
forgotten about
say,
it. It's like,
for Alexandre Cusson, this is somebody who I do not know.
yeah,
But I appreciate the fact that he got into the race just because I think that the last thing, be somebody pro Dominic or anti Dominic, whatever. I just think that the worst possible thing is having a coronation
yeah, for sure.
inside of a leadership race, be it federal or provincial. I think it's the worst thing that you can have. And it goes across all parties, of course. But, seeing this gentleman resign his seat as mayor of Drummondville and his presidency as head of the UMQ, he took all of these risks, and now he finds himself in limbo, in purgatory within politics, and I find that so unfortunate.
Yeah,
But
he was on the podcast. He was on the podcast actually, and we spoke about these things, kind of, off air. I was actually supposed to have Dominic also, but this thing happened. We're going to postpone that. We're going to push that for later. It's unfortunate because I think that even here in Quebec, there's no enthusiasm. There's no excitement.
But nobody wants to hear about this. Like nobody wants to get emails from Peter MacKay 3 times a day. Nobody wants to get emails from Aaron O'Toole about fill in, Easter messages. I don't want to get Easter messages from Aaron O'Toole. I don't want Derek Sloan, this anti-gay MP from Southern Ontario. He's still. Can you imagine? They cut off Rudy, but they let this guy in. Come on, man! Like this is really bad. Like this is really bad.
Who's in the race now? How many people are in the race?
There are 4 candidates, and of course I'm going to mess up the name of the only female in the candidate, but Leslie, I believe her name is Leslyn Lewis, but I could be wrong. But she's African Canadian. She's a woman running in the leadership right now. There is Derek Sloan, who is the MP rather for I think Addington Lennox.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm correct. But all of this is put into a very weird sort of position. I was speaking about this with a former cabinet minister last week, and all of this gets put into a really weird sort of bubble of purgatory right now because theoretically the leadership committee of the Conservative Party could reopen the nomination period, and theoretically they could allow for more candidates to attempt to qualify. This is not out of the ordinary whatsoever because the 4 candidates right now. I was right, Leslyn Lewis. They're verified candidates right now: Peter MacKay, Aaron O'Toole, Leslyn Lewis, and Derek Sloan. These are the 4 verified candidates, but nothing stops the LEOC committee, the leadership committee within the Conservative Party, of reopening. And to be very frank with you, I hope they do. I hope they do.
Would it be fair to do so?
Given the circumstances of having suspended it because of a global pandemic, I think so. But even putting that aside, just because the leadership race is so bad, because every single week there is some sort of stupid tweet that Peter MacKay's team puts out that everybody is laughing at, because his campaign, and I'm not saying this about everybody on the campaign. I've got some really good friends, people that I respect. Benoit Larocque, Alex Nuttall, Carl DeLondes, all really respectable, amazing people that have really given their dedicated their lives to public service and to the party and to the membership.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are people within that campaign that if Peter was really smart, he would go to Aaron O'Toole. He would say, Aaron, I've raised a few $100,000. I would like you to take, my director of digital strategy, Emrys Grafe, and I'd like to take him and I'd like to give him over to, because, we really don't have a place for him anymore. But he's a great guy. We really appreciate him. I'm going to give you $150,000 for you to contract him for the rest of the campaign. And Peter would win the race because he wouldn't have Emrys Grafe on his team anymore. And that is the problem. You have certain individuals in there that are Emrys. I can't. But there are certain people within every campaign, and Emrys knows this, that destroy a political candidate's future. And that is what we are seeing right now with the self-destruction of the Peter MacKay campaign. The only thing that saved Peter MacKay at this point, the only thing that saved him was COVID-19 because it suspended the campaign. It suspended all of the crazy bullshit that he was putting out through Twitter, through Facebook, any of his moronic policy statements that said nothing to Canadians, that appealed to no conservative whatsoever, that no average Canadian wanted to hear about. COVID-19 saved Peter MacKay for now.
But reopening the candidates, the candidatures, it wouldn't be fair to the people that are there now, right? That they did whatever they had to do. They passed the stages and they reached whatever point they reached. Reopening it and say, oh, well, look, we're going to reopen it for another month or two whenever this whole situation is done with. If I were any of these candidates, I would definitely object. I'd be like, look, dude,
sure,
what's going on here? We worked hard. We got to where we got. And why would the party do that, right? I'm not sure I agree with that. I just don't. I just think that they should come back to whatever it was before they suspended it, right? Like before, I don't know, mid-February or early March or whatever. Go back to that and say, look, we're going to go back to whoever it was that who was cut out anyway. Was Rudy the only one that was cut out?
There was a bunch of irrelevant people that were running. There was now everybody I list is going to be presumed to be irrelevant, but that's not the case. Marilyn Gladu, who's a MP for Sarnia, I believe, she was running. There was a bunch of other people that were attempting to get on, former candidates who had never held public office, who had never held a seat in Parliament. So there were people like that. I'd love to see. There was speculation that John Baird might run. I mean, that is somebody of substantial cabinet experience, but at the same time, when you look at the conservative bubble, the conservative tent, John Baird is your red meat Tory. He's not red, but he's definitely like your blue Tory, like super conservative, concrete conservative, but at the same time is somebody who supports the LGBTQ community, somebody who is not going to take an aggressive position when it comes to a woman's right to choose. We're somebody who he's somebody who would be able to bring, I think, all parts of the Conservative Party together and would be more of a Stephen Harper candidate than, the progressive red Tory candidates that we're seeing like Peter MacKay.
What's the controversy with him? He was part of the committee that evaluated the loss of the Conservative Party. No,
yeah.
He's the one that drafted the report. He would have a huge advantage. Has anyone even seen that report? Is it out? Is it public?
No, it's because the whole premise of the report was commissioned by the leader.
Yeah.
And Andrew commissioned John to go through with this report, and it was the report was always only supposed to go to Andrew, and that was going to be that. It was going to be for Andrew's eyes only, and I think parts of it have leaked since then, and which I mean it tends to happen, and that's natural within politics, but. A lot of people were saying it was unfair that John, he got to meet with all of a good segment of the political campaign, a good segment of the candidates, a good segment of the central headquarters in Ottawa. and had, they were accusing John of having all of this intellectual property that he was able to, have such a great understanding of what went wrong. And my response to that is, I think John had a better idea of what went wrong than just about everybody else, including the inner workings of the campaign.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the best people who are able to evaluate a campaign are people that were on the outside. John was not within the war room per se. He was not, didn't have an instrumental role within the campaign itself during the campaign. He was obviously supporting Andrew and would counsel Andrew when he needed to, but at the end of the day, John was not. John was an outsider, and that's why he was brought in to evaluate it from an unbiased perspective.
You don't think that would put him in a position where he would have an advantage?
I don't think that he would necessarily want to have the people that were running Andrew Scheer's campaign on his campaign.
Yeah.
I think it's I mean, I don't think I would want either, but I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, Jean, he was evaluating whether or not he was going to run after Pierre Poilievre dropped out.
Yes.
And there was an absence of a true blue conservative, a true blue Tory running. And John was initially going to chair Pierre's campaign for the leadership.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and then when Pierre, made a sudden decision.
That was a surprise. That surprise.
It was, but there was no. Everybody seems these days to have to jump to some sort of scandal, laden, reason for a politician's abrupt departure from politics or from making a key decision or going forward with a key decision. But it was truly because of his family, and I know his wife.
I believe it. It's just that I didn't.
But there was a lot of people who didn't.
Yeah.
No.
That sucks, honestly. So what's happening now? So everything is obviously everything's halted, everything's on pause, basically.
Right.
Are they postponing? When was it? When was it for? When was the date? Was there a date established for?
Yeah, it was going to be June 27th. So that's when they were going to, process and count the ballots for June 27th. So right now, where they've just what they've decided to do, LEOC, the committee, the leadership committee, is going to come back on May 1st to do a broader reevaluation of the dates. So until May 1st, there's going to be a suspension of leadership fundraising. The party is not going to be processing any donations. The verified candidates thus far, so the 4 candidates, are going to be encouraged to refrain from contacting members or doing anything leadership race, within the leadership race itself. And obviously the convention that was supposed to happen in late June is canceled. So the cutoff for memberships is going to be May 15th. That's the other news. So we're still waiting. I mean, it's going to come soon in terms of what will happen next, but LEOC will be meeting soon about that.
Wow. But like you said, I mean, it really just turned everyone off. Honestly, I agree with you, man. I don't want to hear anything about campaigning. I don't want to hear anything about leadership. This whole thing just put a sour.
But who was the candidate? Who was the one candidate within the conservative leadership race who was pushing day in and day out before LEOC and the Conservative Party made the decision to suspend the race? Who was the candidate who was sending out tweets and pushing and saying, this is democracy, we can't, there could be an election at any second, which is complete ludicrous.
Yeah, for sure.
Peter MacKay, the co-founder of the modern Conservative Party, lacked the political depth to evaluate the situation in a serious manner. Yeah. And it looked really selfish because at the end of the day, Peter's probably going to win. If it remains the race that it is right now, it's going to be the 4 candidates. But I as much as I like Peter as a person, and I think that he'll make a good leader, and I hope that but it all depends on the people he surrounds himself with.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that he makes a great prime minister, but at the end of the day, man, what was your team thinking when they were pushing so hard against this? When everybody from your members to just the general population, people that are not even involved, don't even care about politics, we're saying, I'm hearing about the Conservative Party and Peter MacKay for the first time because they don't want to stop the race. They don't want to suspend the race. What type of sour impression does that leave in a Canadian's mouth?
Yeah.
Incredible.
It is. It is. Look, I can't say much more of the provincial race here in Quebec. I mean, look, I don't know. You know, two candidates, man. You know, for the and we spoke about this. I think it was a mistake to do it this early. I think they should have waited
Yeah,
more, closer to the election date. But you know, we'll live with that, and we'll see what happens. And it's just that nobody really cares, man, at this point. And even
no.
when it picks up again, I mean, how is it going to pick up? How are you just going to forget about everything that just happened and convert your mind to campaigning, right? I mean, it's just weird. That's all it is, you know?
It is, and I think the bit of politics that I've seen thus far, like in during COVID-19, has been from Jason Kenney. And as much as I like Jason Kenney, and I think he's a fantastic premier and an amazing conservative, you when you look at the public polling that you've seen across the provinces, he's the politician, while all the premiers and the prime minister have received a bump, he's received the least amount of a bump in public polling and in actual approval ratings. And there are many factors, I'm sure, as to why that is. The devaluation of oil prices, the current rate of unemployment inside of Alberta. Alberta, while we're talking recession in the rest of Canada, Alberta is talking depression numbers. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
this is the fact of the matter, and that's
It
what.
was bad even before COVID. Imagine
Yeah,
that.
they're facing 25% unemployment in Alberta. That's the fact of the matter, and that's the reality that they're going to be facing right now. But Premier Kenney has a knack for being partisan, and that's fine. But the consequences that come with that are, you could leave a negative impression in your constituents' minds
Mhm.
when it comes to they expect a responsible head of government to be there and to lead. They don't expect somebody to be taking pot shots at the leader of the opposition. So this is in looking at, like, for example, he's one of the only, I think the only premier, I could be wrong, but the only premier to be taking shots at Theresa Tam, who's the head of the Public Health Agency of Canada. We see her every day on almost every day on the briefings in the afternoon with the deputy prime minister, and he has compared her style of her decision making, or her lack of decision making, to that of the WHO. And she works she has a role as an advisor to the World Health Organization, and they've also received an immense amount of criticism. So I think that there's should politics be taking center stage right now?
You can't.
Maybe not. I don't know.
It's tough to say that it should, because people are going to see right through it, right? I mean, look, this is the perfect example. Like I told you, here in Quebec, I mean, everything was going so perfectly. I mean, everybody was. I think people are still tuning in every day to listen to Premier Legault, but I just feel like in the last couple of days, it's turning political, and I just hope that they're going to stop, right? I just hope that they're going to go back to the previous strategy, which is just to come out, reassure people, give the numbers, what's next, what are we doing, and avoid just attacking unions, attacking doctors. It's getting political. You have certain members of of the opposition that have volunteered, and they're working in long-term care facilities, and they're coming out with their impression, rightfully so, because there's obviously
Mhm.
things that are missing, and they're on the attack as well. And I just fear that it's just going to switch into this political battleground, and nothing, like, it's going to be counterproductive. Like, there's no
It's
point.
it's it's too bad that Enrico Ciccone can't body check the COVID-19 virus in the hallway, because that would just be
Yeah.
fantastic.
Like, I follow him. I follow Marie Montpetit, and Monsef Deraji, that also went in. Obviously Barrette, and they came out with like the worst things possible. And look, they're just giving their impression of what they saw, and the reality is that
Right.
Premier Legault is disconnected with what's happening on the ground. And this is the message that has come out this week, right? So, and it's turning political. I can see it coming, and I hope that we avoid it. But I just think it's the wrong approach. You have to avoid it.
Yeah.
Whether you're in opposition or whether you're in government, you just have to avoid it. And these guys, I can understand where they're coming from. They saw things that probably shocked them, uh, you know, uh, frustrated them, mm, and they're just reporting what they saw, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
but I think the messenger is really important, right? Because I mean, of course, anything that they come back and say in a negative context is going to be looked upon negatively by the CAC. I mean, it's the the
I don't know. I feel like, well, what I hope actually is that they're gonna take into consideration what is going on, because they actually have parliamentarians now on the ground reporting and giving feedback on what is actually happening and what is actually needed. So I just hope we avoid, going into the political thing. That's what
well.
I hope, because I don't know.
There's an MPP in Ontario at Queens Park, Natalie Kusendova, and she is a nurse, a registered nurse by training, and was a nurse up until she was elected in 2018 when Ford got into Queens Park. She's a progressive conservative in the Toronto area, and she represents Mississauga, I believe. And she, about 2 weeks ago, made the decision when they were making call outs for nurses, retired nurses, nurses that were suspended, to come back into the workforce. She decided to,
Hmm.
and I think that I'm sure she has seen the same problems that Quebec has
Hmm.
been dealing. Of course, every province, every jurisdiction has their own issues, but at the same time, she's not going to speak out negatively against the
Of course
PC
not,
government.
because
She's
it's
not
her
going to
party
speak out,
that's in government.
of course, but I would presume the types of conversations that she's having with the premier, or with the premier's office, or with the Ministry of Health, that are of a political nature and are negative, and is constructive feedback that they can
Mhm.
use to bonify the services that need to be reported on. I think that it would go a lot further if the Marie Montpetits, or the Enrico Cicconis, or the Gaetan Barret's were giving this constructive feedback, instead of going to the media, or making a Facebook statement, or making a video on Twitter,
Yeah, I
and
agree.
going out there and saying, "Oh my God, look at this terrible, terrible mess that François Legault is administering as premier, and look at how there's a lack of action, and a lack of political will to do something about this." Instead of going that route immediately, which is still a viable option, you can instead, first and foremost, go to the premier himself,
Yeah.
because I've always seen François Legault as being the type of person, as being open to hearing this type of stuff, if it's not done in a public forum. If you go to him privately, his staff are like that. I've dealt with his staff on many projects.
Yeah.
They're human beings like you and me. And
But especially with this circumstance, I know that they've had a very collaborative uh, environment, with all the leaders of the opposition. I mean, so far,
yeah,
it's been constructive, and he's come out and thanked the leaders of the opposition. Uh, it's just this week that I'm noticing that it's taking a turn, and I hope they avoid it, because I just don't see how anything good can come out of any of this.
right. But I mean, it's again, it's playing politics in a time where you shouldn't be playing politics, and it goes for both sides. It goes with Legault speaking to the unions the way that he's speaking to them, which I think is a huge mistake, because
Yeah,
I
that
think
was a mistake.
if nurses are going to be protected by the public, they are looked upon by the public in the highest regard right now, and that was even before COVID-19, but it's going to be even more so afterwards. And I think it goes the same way in terms, and I know you'll disagree with me, but even when it comes to members of the opposition criticizing publicly, I think that's bad for their image too. And it the polls show it right now. I know that polling is take it with a grain of salt given the circumstances we're in. But I mean, the liberals weren't doing that great, before COVID-19 came along to begin with, and I don't think they're going to be doing all that much better after COVID-19. So
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Um, Going forward, how do we prepare? How do we prepare for post COVID? What do the governments have to deal with? What kind of repercussions you think we're going to see? Impacts, socially, at a community level, politically, economically, even internationally. I mean, you mentioned before the dispute with 3M. I mean, obviously, there's international agreements that have been affected by this, right? How do we prepare for what's coming?
I think first and foremost, you prepare by getting ready for a second wave, and by the possibility of that happening sooner than we think. Pence came out today and said that the U.S. is prepared for a second wave, that they're working on, emergency measures for that. But at the same time, if you're this is where we're caught we're in a bit of a debacle. You can't be prepared for a second wave, or say that you're prepared for a second wave, when you are looking at reopening the economy
Yeah.
with imminently. And I don't see how that goes within public health standards that are acceptable. I don't think they're acceptable. I think the same thing is being said by, be it Dr. Aruda, be it Dr. Tam. I think most people understand that, a second wave is probably going to happen. And when you're saying that this could go all the way forward to 2021, I think that the best thing that people should be doing, maybe, yes, reopening the economy is a major part of it. But I think first and foremost, you think about ensuring that, you're able to keep the curve flat in the way it is. That's at least what comes into, my sort of thinking right now. I think on the economic side of things, in terms of the labor force, the first thing that Trudeau did right was solidifying the banking system, and allowing banks to loan a lot more money. He was able to pump money into businesses, that, again, loans, a very small percentage of it will be forgiven. But I think that was, that is the first layer that you need, in terms of reopening the economy. Step two was the SIR program. And what I think is a very likely possibility is, in many of the instances where we've seen in the Western world programs like CERB, the Canadian Emergency Benefit, where you see programs like this, which almost act as like a universal income source. You've seen them kept. You see them kept after they have been put into place, because it becomes natural to keep it there. So I think that such a benefit will probably be kept in place, just because the economy is not going to open like this, and businesses are not going to come back like this. Clientele will have to be rebuilt over a period of time, and this could take several years. It was the same thing in 2008. The economy did not just come back in 09, 10, 11. It took until about 2014, 2015 for the economy to actually rebound and actually have, growth beyond what was lost.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be a really important thing to see right there. So, governments are going to have to reevaluate how, the levels of poverty and low income in Canada right now, and how programs were working before and how they're going to have to work afterwards. And I think that's where like a universal basic income will come into play. I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. I'm just saying that's how I predict the government's response to, ensuring that people are going to be able to spend some money. If they have money, the only way they're going to have money is through this program. And I think that's the only way that they can come back at this point. But it's going to be a slow, I think it's going to be a step-by-step process. That's going to be a trial and error. There's going to be certain things that happen which are going to have to be brought back. You're going to see cases of COVID-19 or outbreaks of COVID-19 happen in areas where businesses or certain industries reopened too early. It was a mistake, and they're going to close again. And the government's going to get a nice tap on the hand like that from the public, from public health administrators who are saying, we told you so. It was too early. We told you not to do it, but you did it anyway. And now you got to face the consequences.
Yeah. Dude, I took up a lot of your time, man.
No, you didn't. You never take up my time. I love this. I love being able to chat with you, man.
Definitely fun. We're going to go for the fourth.
Hey.
I appreciate your time, buddy. Always a pleasure. I'm not going to keep you much longer. Dude, stay safe.
Likewise, stay confined. If you want to do a COVID drink with me anytime soon, I swear this is tea.
Okay.
At this point, but I have a feeling
I swear this is water, so it's nothing.
Yeah, for sure. But if we do a fourth in a couple of weeks, I'm pretty sure that this will be full of vodka. Yeah. But that's between you and me and everybody who's listening right now. So,
dude, thanks a lot, man. Take care of yourself, and let's hope everything just
everything is gonna be all right.
Be all right. Everyone is worried. Everyone is thinking of other people, and we're all in this together, I think. And eventually, things are going to be okay. And let's be hopeful, man.
Smoke some weed; it helps.
I don't, but if you want, you can do that.
I do it so you don't have to. It's fine.
All right, buddy. Have a good night. Take care.
Take it easy. Ciao, ciao.